Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar on HR strategies, creating accountability for staff and building strong foundations. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians and sovereign people of the land across which we work. I recognize their continuing connection to land, water, and community, and pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging. I would also like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal colleagues who may be joining us tonight. My name is Sarah Matten. I'm one of the Practice Support and Development Program Officers here at Central and Eastern Sydney PHN. I also have with me tonight Fiona McNamara from our team and the lovely Lauren Thomas from our CPD and events team assisting us in the background. Just before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. Please note this webinar will be recorded and the link will only be sent to the attendees in the next couple of days. At the end of the session, the evaluation survey will pop up on your browser. Please fill out this feedback form on the education and the webinar experience so that we can continue to improve our CPD events we offer. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box and we'll do our best to answer them all at the end of the presentation, and we'll also try to do some during. I would also like to draw your attention to some of our upcoming events that will be up on your screen now. Registrations for these events are available on our Central and Eastern Sydney website. I would now like to introduce our speaker for tonight, George Sotiris. George is the founder and director of Health Industry Employment Services. George is a workplace relations specialist who has devoted his professional career to the health industry. His passion for the sector started when he commenced working for a peak body in Queensland, where he held the position of workplace relations manager and provided practical HR solution to hundreds of practices and was an advocate for members he worked with. George believes that any successful practice is built on strong employment foundations that create accountability from the top down. Dealing with staffing disputes is amongst one of the most challenging issues owners and managers will have to deal with. George and his team assist to simplify these complex issues and educate practices on how to build strong systems that create better workplaces. George is passionate, dedicated, and driven in providing the health industry with workplace relations support that makes a difference. Thank you, George.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for obviously the PHN as well for putting this in. We're really excited. I suppose this has been a very big topic that we have been, requested to present and share, because the HR side of practice is always a little bit fun. There's always something that goes on with it, and it's forever changing. And building accountability, having a strong system, having good rapport, good culture in your practice is one of the most important things we love to see. And there is a method to build accountability in your clinic. So that's exactly what we will go through today, or tonight, sorry. Obviously, as Sarah gave me a beautiful introduction, all we do is support GP specialists and allied health practices nationally, build those strong foundations. It is all about dealing with difficult situations, being proactive as managers and owners, and making sure you can prepare your HR journey to be supportive of you as a manager and leader in your practice. So what we will cover today, we've got a very structured overview, and this all leads back to the key topic there of creating accountability in practice. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about creating strong employment foundations. If you've never thought about your employment foundations or the key considerations of what you have to, I will break it down for you with step-by-step processes. We'll look at some of the recent legislation changes, and more importantly, some of the proposed changes that are coming, especially that will impact casual versus permanent employees. Again, just when we thought the dust was settled there, there's a little bit more that the Albanese government will be pushing through. How do you maximize your foundation? So it takes so much time to build good systems and processes, but as a group, how do you stay on top of it? How do you get the most out of it? And more importantly, when you need it the most, how do you use it? And again, we then want to look at creating that effective process and positive process from the inside out. So you can have all the systems, all the processes, but how do you as an individual as a manager, use them to your advantage, and also create, have the right social skills to support your staff in these ways. So let's get straight off onto it. One of my favorite topics, obviously, is talking all about employment foundations. So with regards to employment foundations, what you see on the screen here is what we work with and look at day in, day out with practices. And when you're reviewing your HR practices, you should be considering all of these elements. So, of course, compliance is the first one. That's looking at what does Fair Work expect from us. Everyone should know the modern awards by now. So that's the HPSS, Nurses Award. If you have beauty therapists or others, if you've got skin attached to your GP practice, obviously the Hair and Beauty Award may apply. But it's not just the modern awards anymore. You've obviously got all your national employment standards. There's all these other risks of claims and processes. So where we love to start off with, and it is a point of consideration you should all be mindful of, starting off with your modern awards, be it the Health Professionals and Support Services Award or the Nurses Award, understanding how your practice is running or compliant with it is important. We've probably worked with about a dozen practices over the last 12 months that have had some form of significant back pay related issues. And most of them, all of them are just through systems and processes being missed. So, if we start off, when you look at an award, the first thing you have to establish is how do you actually read and understand the provisions of the award itself. So that's looking at your classification levels. And what we're doing this evening, just so everyone can have a very nice overview of what that looks like, I'm just going to have a new share so you can see exactly where the awards, and feel free to put things in the chat and Q&A as we go. So as you'll see here, there should be a new share there that everyone can see. So this is the Modern Award. So this is the HPSS award. You can easily get it from the website. It's the most reliable site, or our website, but the government website is most reliable in the sense of being up to date. So this has changed recently as well. So when you start off by looking at awards, you want to make sure that you understand and classify your staff correctly. Again, that's done by, you see 9 different levels in the HPSS award. You want to make sure that all these levels here are classified right. So I'm only going to go through the first 2 or 3 just to give you a good idea of what you have to do in your practice to get the levels right. And this all builds up in the accountability framework. So understanding that a support service employee, level 1, is someone who has less than 3 months work experience in the industry, who performs basic duties. They work under established routines, method, procedures. They have minimal responsibility, accountability, or discretion, and they work under direct and routine supervision. So if you have a new receptionist starting with you, they've never worked in health before, a level 1 is where they would belong. After 3 months, though, if they've been there, they're starting to pick up the role, they're not working under direct or routine in a buddy system anymore, you'd be looking at a level 2. So that's where you have to progress it. And it doesn't really matter if they're there for 3 months full-time or part-time. You have to look at the definition as a whole to see if they are working semi-autonomously or not. So a level 2 is someone who prioritizes routine, methods, procedures. They have a limited level of accountability now. They work under limited supervision, so it's not direct or routine. So they've got a bit more accountability, and they have sound communication skills. We generally look at someone who's a level 2 who has between 3 months and a year's experience in the health industry. So when we talk about the health industry, that can be GP, specialists, allied health, dental, anyone in primary health from that side there. So level 2 will sit between 3 months and a year. But generally speaking, if you've had a receptionist with you for over a year, they should be a level 3. So a level 3 is someone who can prioritize their work. They have a medium level of accountability. They possess sound communication and rhythmic skills, work under limited supervision, and they've got the right skills and training to do the job at that level. So these levels can be extremely difficult to break down, but you have to take the time to read it, because at a level 3 to a level 4, it's a little bit more confusing, and I'll stop at a level 4 because it goes from a level 3 has sound communication to a level 4 that says good communication. The rest is generally the same, but what's the difference between sound and good? Can sometimes be a bit tricky. But the key points here as well to consider is that they may have formal qualifications at a Cert 3 level or specific on the job training. So we've seen roles in practices where a receptionist will focus more on recalls, not be accountable for it, but they've been trained and upskilled to do more in a recall position behind office. And they've been trained by management in that capacity. So that would potentially jump them up from a level 3 to a level 4. So having the background understanding and applying this exact same method to your nurses is what you have to do. So you need to go to the ward, go to Schedule A classification definitions, and get the right level to classify your staff accordingly. So this is the first pillar of compliance you have to adhere to. And once you've got those definitions and levels correct, the simple and next step is then, and I'll just have a new share pop up too. The next thing you have to do is classify your staff from their level to the right rates of pay. And we all saw the 5.75% increase on 1 July, which is a massive jump. It's the biggest we've seen in 2 decades since 2010, when the Fair Work was originally introduced. So with that said, a casual level 3 receptionist now is $32.35. So if you've had a receptionist who's been with you for more than 12 months, who's casual, and you're not paying them $32.35, it's likely that there might be a discrepancy of payment in their wages. So again, these are the breakdown. These are the levels that match to it. These are what we send out to our members every year, and they're just nice little short snapshots too. Practice managers, level 9, pay point 3. If you've got experience, you run the show, you've got full accountability. The minimum rates there are 35 and 4 cents. So there have been some great surveys that have gone out this year, which are generally indicating managers are in the high 30s, early 40s per hour. And as that accountability progresses with more practices and more strategic or BM-based roles, we're seeing, from 45 to 55, in excess of that in some situations too. But your key considerations is making sure you can understand your position with the awards and the classifications, and you apply it accordingly. So that's the first step. Get your levels, get your rates right, because then everything you do from there onwards will be correct with regards to making sure staff penalties, loadings, allowances are all paid correctly. So when we talk about loadings, penalties, and other rates, I'm going to jump back to the award. And again, just a nice way to keep everything in the loop so we can all see how it all works together. So here is the HPSS award again. It's just the online version as mentioned. There are 3 things you have to consider. Knowing the difference between full-time, part-time, and casual is really important. Us as advisors, we guide you through these exact same definitions, and this is what you have to pick up and learn. So a full-timer under the HPSS award, someone who works 38 hours week in, week out for 52 weeks of the year. You can average that to 76 a fortnight or 152 over a 4-week period. Part-timers, part-time and casual, I'm going to spend a bit of time on them because there's a lot of change that's likely to come. So you want to get this right. So part-time employees, they work less than 38 hours. They have reasonably predictable hours of work per week. This point here, clause 10.2, is extremely crucial to get right. So before they commence employment, you need to make sure that you have the number of hours that they're working each week, the specific days of the week the employee will work, and the starting and finishing time of those days. So those 3 elements must be agreed in writing. And if you want to have a staff member or they request or you request them to work outside of those agreed hours, if it's to fill someone who's on leave or someone who's working different hours, you need to have it recorded in writing. So we generate part-time variation forms for our clients to fill out and use, and you need to make sure you have part-time variation forms filled out there. So again, having those elements there, because if you don't have a variation in writing and someone does work outside their agreed hours, it will be a point of overtime applying when they work outside of their part-time HPSS hours. So again, Get that right, because these basics will build up into how you manage your staff and other risks that can appear. Casuals, again, under the HPSS award, as long as they work their minimum 3 hours per engagement per shift, nice and easy, not too complex at all. So these are just the basics of compliance in that should have popped up too. So these are just the entry level points. So when you get your levels right, you have your classifications correct, you have your rate of pay right, everything else you do from a compliance point interpreting the award will be done correctly. And the awards are complex, so you need to make sure you know where to start. So hopefully that's a really good point where to position it through to. Again, you need to break down the nurses award and start to look at provisions like the National Employment Standards. So the NES, again, looks at leave, but the awards can tell you different things. So nurses get 5 weeks of annual leave a year compared to the standard 4 weeks under the nurses award. So you want to make sure you review your provisions in your zero MIOP system. So we work with a lot of practices. When we do our reviews, we will go into zero, make sure all the nurses are set up on 5 weeks, which is 190 hours per annum. And that's a very big point that if you miss it, you have to reinstate it. And we've had practices that have had hundreds of hours reinstated back to nurses who've missed it over periods of, 10 or 15 years. So it is something that you need to get right. But from a compliance point, we have Fair Work there as a governing body. And when we build or think about accountability, there are so many good resources that they provide to us that give us a framework of how to manage staff. So when you're managing a difficult situation in practice, and when you're thinking about compliance and risk management, if you need to exit someone or performance manage someone, the biggest fear is always about how do we have the discussion appropriately and get through the process itself. But then the second big thing is, how do we alleviate any risk? Staff have so many different avenues of claims with Fair Work. If it's an unfair dismissal, general protections, work cover, or other related claim, the Commission provides us with compliance points we need to follow. So the whole process of 3 warnings and you're out, that's not necessarily a rule that is legislated anywhere. What the Commission looks at from a termination perspective is, was your termination harsh, unjust, or unreasonable? And they're the 3 criteria that's legislated under the Act that talk about, well, did we follow the right process as an employer to deal with the situation? So that's what you need to consider. And the Fair Work gives us those points of what we need to follow, but it's just not simple. So this is where, when you're dealing with a complex or difficult situation in practice, you want to make sure that you're paying your staff right, you're dealing with the right process, you understand your risk at start, so you can be, I suppose, better foundationally grounded to either hold someone accountable or make sure that when you're going through a difficult situation, the union or other parties don't get involved to then turn around to say, well, oh, you've actually underpaid this person, by X amount, or they're at the wrong level. And we have one of those situations at the moment where there was a registered nurse who'd been with a practice for 15 years, has significantly changed her behavior and pattern towards the manager and director, has just become very unhappy at work. The performance has started to slip significantly. They've started performance discussions. The QNUs become involved, which is fine. But what they've started to identify is that this person's been working there for 15 years, has been a level 1, pay point 8, and they're coming back saying, well, they're a level 2, pay point 4. They should have been this for the last 5 years, or pre-COVID when they started doing more training and support. Their role expanded throughout COVID, and now they've put a back payment of wages claim in excess of $40,000 because they pay on award in this situation. So these are the points that, if you get these right, even though it's very easy to miss things along the way, you want to make sure that you're guided through the awards correctly, and situations can't distract you. So not only are they dealing with a performance management claim and a back payment of wages claim, this employee's exercised a workplace right. On one hand, you have the manager who's stressed out, worried about how to deal with it, trying to deal with the wages issue. But then you've got the owner in this situation, and I was well saying, well, I don't want this person here. Get them out of my practice. I don't want to have to deal with these headaches when we've done everything for this person over the last 15 years and they've forgotten about that. And now we're being sued for, X amount when we've done nothing wrong. And that pressure, again, I feel that it's putting more unreasonable pressure on the manager in this situation because they're stuck between a position of they understand where the owner's coming from. They can't understand the situation where the union's coming from, but they're at a point where they need to still manage the performance and attitude of the individual. So trying to hold this person accountable to their action, behavior, and performance when a relationship is broken is extremely difficult because you have a claim and an allegation going through with unions and the employee isn't communicating to you about it, but you have a union speaking to you about it. When you're in the same coffee room or in the same lunchroom, with an individual who isn't transparently open or speaking to you about a situation, it can damage the relationship. So this is where situations and points like those claims are unavoidable. If they happen, you just have to deal with the first issue, make sure you put the payment of wages, and if there are errors, put that to bed, and then continue through with the performance management. And it's very likely that that's what will happen in this scenario where the wages claim and whatever it might be will be resolved. And the performance management process will just see through and continue until the employee either makes improvement or terminates. But the way it's heading, it's likely that the individual will be dismissed because of the breakdown in relationship also. So understand your compliance because it's a lot more than just the awards, getting the basics, going through what I've just shown you about getting your rates right. You need to make sure that you understand the fundamentals of how to manage staff the way Fair Work wants us to. There's a unfair dismissal bench book. If you're a small business and you've never read the Small Business Fair Dismissal Code, it's excellent. I'm happy to send it through to you, but this is a process that Fair Work wants you to follow when you're terminating a staff member if you're under 15 employees. And again, it's another compliance point that's given. So we've had a anonymous query come through as well, which is excellent. I'm going to answer this one live because it's very relevant. Can employees claim for back pay or underpayment once they are no longer employed or have resigned? So the statutory limitation of claims is actually 7 years. So the answer is yes, they can. And when we often deal with disputes and issues, especially when individuals are buddies at practices, you will find that they will go and tell others that have left that then come back. And if it's within that period of time, that there may be a claim from a staff member who's left for a long period of time. So this is the other difficult side of dealing with that is you can't, especially now with how the government has structured transparency of wages, other points of increasing, giving employees more rights to negotiate their wages and so forth. We are finding that there is a lot more talk about what people receive, what they don't. And we have had instances where people have just openly spoken about it amongst each other recently and have had, it then approached with employers saying, well, look, I'm not getting this penalty, but I've heard that others are. I want to be paid this penalty. And in an employer's situation, they're saying, well, no, that's an individual arrangement that was agreed with that, party, or that's not the right arrangements there. And then you're left with a position saying, well, look, if I don't get it, I'm going to start looking elsewhere. So not generally what you want to be faced with, and not the type of attitude you want from, staff as well. But it is something now with the pay secrecy provisions that have been introduced. Staff are actively talking about their award provisions, what they get, what's in their contract. And it makes your position a little bit harder because you generally want to reward your staff on how well they perform, their ethics, their values that align with yours as a practice. You generally increase over periods of time, and that obviously leads to someone's rate of pay where they are at that position. So what we're finding is that, you have people coming into the market saying, well, I want to be paid, extremely higher than these loyal, good staff you have. And you might be in a position where you have to pay someone a little bit higher just to get, I'm not going to say a bum on the seat, but just to recruit someone in a difficult situation, which you've got good loyal staff that aren't getting paid that high. So it is a bit of a difficult point to consider. But again, back payment of wages claimants can proceed back to ex-employees and for that period of time. So it's the last thing we need with all the payroll tax and other issues that are coming through at the moment as well. With contracts, again, it is another big point that when you're starting any process, if it's a performance management, a termination, it's always great to know what's in your contract. Not that you're going to say, bring out your contract and say you're breaching your agreement, I'm going to fire you or give you a warning. Having good agreements can be the difference when you're at a point of having a claim or going through a dismissal process, or if there's a back payment or wages claim, you might have offset clauses in there. You might have things that talk about what misconduct or breach of agreements are. So you want to make sure your contracts have been updated, or if you haven't updated them in the last couple of years, take the time to work with specialists like ourselves to update agreements, because you will need to make sure that they comply with all the changing laws. So a great one is with permanent, part-time and casuals. I outlined that before. They're proposing, the Albanese government's proposed to introduce it's called a closing loophole bill, which they published a couple of days ago. And if you missed it, it spoke about a few key things. One of them was the wage theft, so criminalization of wage theft, which isn't a new thing. But what they've included in this legislation or the bill is jail time. And when you hear about the cases they were dealing with, though, it was cases where 7-Eleven employers were paying someone their full wage and having false timesheets that represented a full week. But then once they paid them, they were getting the employee, walking them across the street to get them to go to an ATM to pay out cash to give back to the employer. So these new bills or closing loopholes or giving penalty time in prison, I personally think makes lots of sense to situations like that. And the likelihood of, primary health or private practice employers being put in that position or doing that, I would hate to see it, but I haven't seen it in 15 years in my role. But again, you understand where some of that new legislation comes from and why the penalties are so severe, because that's terrible. Imagine being an employer, being in a position where you might be on a visa or working conditions or sponsored, someone saying, well, I'm going to pay this, but you need to give me cash back from an ATM as part of it. So they're the points of where some of these bills have come through. But the other big point, just when we thought it was all over with permanent part-time versus casual, obviously you've got all your right to request casual conversions, your contracts. If you haven't updated casual contracts recently, you want to make sure you spend time updating them, because that is what protected that case. The Rosado case was the fact that the mine site had a proper casual contract that offset the 25% loading, and it was clearly a casual arrangement, is what protected them from having to back pay the paid leave entitlements. But it came back to the fact of this new bill now saying, well, it doesn't matter what you have in writing. What we want to introduce is legislation that looks at what happens in practice and in reality. So in other words, if it looks, smells, and tastes like a casual, we're going to look at that and factor that in as a casual, not what's in the contract. So if this passes, which they're looking at in October and November, this will be another big change to the way we engage casuals and permanents. I just showed you how difficult it is to employ a permanent receptionist and the lack of flexibility you have because of the compliance point. So again, if your contracts aren't reflecting that, or if you don't have a clear understanding of how to employ them, you're not going to be prepared for these changes if they come into place. So this is again where you want to pick up your agreements, look at them. You want to make sure the templates are right for you. And the exact same scenario, we're working with a practice this morning that was new, and they said, Georgette, we need award compliant contracts. I sat down with them. We do a bit of a gap review, which we always do because we just don't hand out templates. And it turns out that they weren't paying leave loading. And with the bookkeeper in their room, they said, no, we don't pay overtime. It just gets paid at the above award rate, because they pay all their staff, $6 to $7 above the minimum award rate, so they don't pay overtime. They contract out of it, and Saturdays are paid. So they had such a convoluted payment structure. Their previous contracts were just salaried contracts, which were inaccurate. So again, trying to get the right agreement and understanding of what you do in practice and having it reflecting new agreements is so important. So again, start off, get your compliance right, get your contracts right. Once you get them right once, they'll last a very long time. Employment policies. This is always a difficult one. As managers and owners, we spend so much time building systems, processes. We're here talking tonight about foundations and accountability. I love policies in a weird way, just because when we're dealing with difficult situations and processes, the employers who spend more time on their systems, their processes and policies generally have such a easier management experience than ones who don't. And what that means, if you build your operational procedures, if you spend time on your bullying, harassment, discrimination policies, or your code of conduct, or you do training, or you don't have to be as direct as that, but you can talk about, particular attributes you love. You can talk about why you're there as a team, what your vision is, what your values are, what you expect from each other, what we expect when we treat our patients and our people that come through the front door of the practice. So having systems and documents that are clear with the expectation give you a much stronger position when you have to manage a difficult situation. So your employment policy should do exactly that. And we generally do the whole question of, well, we don't care if it's in a software program, if it's on a OneDrive, if it's on a Google Drive, or if it's on a back of a bit of paper in your office or at the front desk. So long as you can demonstrate how you advocate and bring life to your policies, that is what the commission looks for, and that's exactly what we do. Because then you can say, well, look, yes, we did a training with our staff. We spoke about our code of conduct, which is really the only core document you have that talks about managing behavioral issues. And you think about accountability, you're either going to have someone who's underperforming or someone who has behavioral or conduct issues. So if you haven't looked at your code of conduct, we call it a respectful workplace policy. And we really spell out, the code or the conduct that's directed towards your patients, directed towards each other, and directed towards the practice. So, and we have really stipulated the types of behavior and conduct we want to see and what's in breach of it. So again, you want to make sure that you can bring life to it, because it's much easier when you're going through certain processes rather than saying, well, I feel, or it's my opinion that you've done this wrong. At least saying, well, look, it's our practice policy and it's what our values drive through that. This is how we want to see patients driven. It's what we spend all this time doing our training and support on, and it comes back to your policy rather than you as an individual. It takes out that emotion of it as well, and it's exactly what they're there to do. So look at your employment policies. If I come in and you can't show me that you've done some form of training or reinduction on them in the last 6 to 12 months, it's very likely that the Fair Work Commission, if you're trying to use it of a breach of policy, they won't let you use it. And that will then again come back to the whole, was it too harsh, unjust, or unreasonable? It might trigger back to say, well, yes, it was harsh that you tried to implement or enforce a policy that was implemented 3 years ago that you've done no training on, that was locked in your room or that staff had no access to. And it's even like some of these new software programs we see where staff have, there might be policies in a program, but they can't access it because not everyone has a license. So it is the point of, you want to make sure that if you've got policies, as mentioned, we don't care where they belong or live, but we just want to make sure your staff can access them. You've done regular training, and that's the key point that you want to make sure from your policy side. WHS, I'm not going to spend too much time, but what we've seen from a accountability perspective is more back to employers. And that's especially looking at you as an employer, making sure that you're understanding what your hazards are, who's responsible, you're doing your walkthroughs. That means actually doing a physical walkthrough, looking at your hazards themselves, making sure that you've got the right control measures in place. You do your little skill matrix to assess what's serious, you triage your hazards, and have a system. But WHS has been complicated quite a bit. Over the last 12 months, you may have heard about psychosocial hazards. So there've been a lot of pieces of legislation and codes of practices that have spoken about dealing with physical injuries or things that create it. They've spent a lot more time over the last couple of years building up codes and law that talks about psychological based harm, and which is where these psychosocial hazards come from. And again, this is where you really want to make sure that you're building out practices to keep staff. So a scenario we like to provide is if you've got a staff member who's been there, for a long period of time, culturally, they're the reason why people are leaving. People complain about them. You bring new staff on, they undermine them, they don't share information, they make things difficult. And again, from that perspective, you're put in a position that you can't manage them because all the doctors love this person, the patients love them. They do their job exceptionally well, but they're just terrible with everyone, and people get uncomfortable when around them. They undermine them, they borderline bully them, but they do it on the side skirts, and it's not as obvious, but there is generally a common theme there that you'll see with this individual. This legislation is designed to protect employees and put a positive obligation on employers to have to deal with situations. And you can't say, well, that's just George and he's been here 20 years and that's acceptable and that's just the way it is. This new legislation obviously has further penalties and points of claim. So again, make sure you understand what your WHR foundations and systems are. But we generally find practices get so built up dealing with the compliance, the contracts, policies. WHS generally gets put to the bottom of the pile unless something like COVID comes through and we have to wear masks, get injections, and do everything else in between. So again, when we work and when we support practices, these are the 4 pillars of foundation we work with. So I want you to all take this as a way as your, well, what should we start off to build foundations? Because this is the backbone of creating accountability in your practice. And when you're then having those difficult discussions, you can rely on your systems and processes. And it also comes back to your operational procedures. We've seen amazing work with some of our practices and what they've done with regards to building up operational procedures. And it's not just boring 300 pages of tasks in it. So we've seen practices, even just through, simple programs on the computer, they will do a screen record of what they're doing and they'll have how to book a patient in. Or we've had others in a nursing team where how do you, do a particular procedure, or how to use our sterilization, or what's our process, and they'll actually film how they sterilize in their practice and put that in their manual. So they'll still have a nice little short dot point procedure of how they should do it, but then they'll also have a nice recording there that new staff, or when they do reinduction, they have the procedure there that's been signed off by the clinical lead. To me, that's worth its weight in gold because staff know the expectation. It's fun, it's easy to watch and understand, and it's easy to do when you get the right people on board. So think about those systems and processes, because when you're building accountability, you're trying to hold someone accountable, they're the points you need to do and demonstrate as well. If someone's either behaviorally not acting right or they're underperforming, as a manager, what have you done to ensure there's role clarity and understanding of their job, an understanding of that procedure, and expectation of behavior and conduct? So these are the types of tools you need to go back to support yourself. And the more time you spend on your procedures and processes, hopefully the easier it is for you to manage your staff. And again, it allows you to have the freedom then from a cultural perspective, just to set an expectation that what you do and don't tolerate at your practice. So get your basics right, get your foundations in order, and spend time on it, because it will make your life easier as a manager. I like to look at this as sort of a key pillar. So once you get your basics right, and what we've just gone through, we consider is getting your basics right. As mentioned, that gives you the foundation to create accountability, because then as you slowly introduce new policies, new processes, you get your staff involved. So don't just do it yourself, get staff involved with these procedures, excite them about it. I know that sounds weird. How do you excite a staff member? about a policy or a procedure or task, you'll be surprised. And it's a great way to think about succession. If you're an owner, manager here online, what are your next steps? Your staff's career development. Have you thought about, well, do you have stars there that want more work, that are getting a bit stagnant, that aren't enjoying what they might be doing? You learning to delegate to the right parties and having them support you through that process is so important, because when you have people involved, they're more likely to follow. And ultimately, if you're introducing new procedures and processes, you're going to get more of a buy-in, which will create that accountability. So again, get your basics right, create that accountability, and make sure you, as managers and owners, I'm not going to say police it, but you set that culture. If you let someone get away with something, what precedent does that set for other staff that are? So, and they're the points that you need to make sure that you're going to spend so much time building it. If you build all the hard work and you let people, I suppose, work the way they want to, it goes against the grain and the culture of what you're trying to set. So make sure you can manage staff accordingly. Once you've created accountability, it allows you to refine it. It allows you to customize it to suit you and your practice. And you get to, again, have that degree of separation of having more involvement, more engagement, and more control across the board. And the final point, it allows you to be agile, because if you've got good systems, good processes, things are documented well, it's not that hard to change it once it's there. So if things do change, you have another round of COVID, or you have a staff turnover, or a restructure of a business, at least all your systems and processes are there, and you can be agile to move with whatever curveball you get thrown at. So that's our concept and model that you should adapt in practice when you consider your employment foundations. So make sure you work with it from that side. I want to spend the next 20 minutes, again, talking about having an accountability mindset. All the systems, process, HR functions we've just gone through, keeping up with legislation, making sure your staff are paid right, having your policies, your operational procedures, having all that in order is the start. But as a manager and owner, you need to make sure that your mindset of accountability is there and understood. Because this is ultimately what we need to do to ensure that we follow fair and reasonable processes. And I think it's important that, we are taking steps that we would expect if we were in their shoes. And this is ultimately a big point that, our team tries to do as best we possibly can, because you might be presented with a situation that at first might seem pretty bad. However, if you do and follow a right step, or you ask the right questions, you might be able to understand something else. Now, with a lot of the changes of the family and domestic violence leave legislation, employers having to pay the 10 days themselves out of their pocket, and all employees, full-time, part-time, casuals, being able to access this pay, the family and domestic violence leave. We have seen a big increase in it. The awareness is there. Staff have accessed it. And it's quite surprising, because that staff member that, we've seen managers being concerned about from a performance, or just acting weird, coming to work late, just being very cagey on certain things, when they've opened up or disclosed that they've been going through this. And, they need time to go and change bank account details, or to find another home to live in because of their situation. Has changed a lot of managers' perspectives around, well, wow, it wasn't just a performance issue, and from the accountability side, they hadn't potentially followed the right steps to create that awareness they needed to. So what I want to take you through is just, how do you build your mindset? How do you ask the right questions? How do you use your social skills? How do you interact with your staff? But I want to start with this big point. I provided the scenario of that long-standing staff member who's been there for a very long time. They've generally, the doctors love them. Some do, some don't. The patients love them, but they are just extremely difficult to deal with when it comes across the board. Having the right authority and ability to deal with these situations is where you have to consider. And having buy-in from your owners or your board, depending on your structure, is so crucial. Because if we're and I love chess too. And I think this photo is great because you've got your queen and your pawn dressed as a queen, and you don't want to be in that position. You want to be the queen of your practice. Take it that as you may. So, and that means, you want to be able to move wherever you want to on the board. So long as you're in the right direction, you're doing it in the right way, you're not going over people. I think it's so important that as a manager and as a leader, you have the right ability to manage your staff accordingly. But that means that you have to have the correct support from your owner or your board. And if you start a process, but then you have to backtrack because they don't want to go down that step, or they don't think it's appropriate, or they just want to allow it to be part of the culture, whichever the one it is a big point that you then have to consider. Is it worth your time or energy dealing with a situation if you don't have the authority to deal with it properly? Because there's nothing worse than starting a difficult procedure and process if you can't progress it through all the way. So again, understand what the support is. If you're dealing with a difficult situation, you need to make sure you strategize, you think about how you're going to approach it, how it's going to be fair and reasonable, and map it out. Actually go through a journey to say, well, these are the constant issues. This is how we want to create awareness. This is how we want to, get someone's involvement in showing improvement. And these are the points where you draw the line in the sand. And that's a big point you want to see, is where do we say enough's enough? Recruitment is slowly getting better. And I'm going to pause there for you to think about that for a second. We have seen a big shift in practices being able to recruit a little bit better. But again, it is coming back to the point of, not allowing behavior because you've got no other choice, because who's going to do that job? It's going to fall on my plate if I don't, just allow that person to get away with that. Or if I bring it up or address them and they leave, it's going to create more stress. So I suppose we're getting a lot beyond that now, because the market is shifting. We are seeing better applicants come through. We are seeing it, come back to normalize a little bit. And we tolerated a lot throughout the last couple of years, whereas we don't have to anymore. Deal with those difficult situations. Don't let those staff get away with it, and create that accountability framework around them that gives them the opportunity to show improvement, or start managing them out, because that's what will allow you to get control of your culture, and you need to have the right authority to do it. So hold yourself accountable. I think this is such a big point, and I love using the terminology being foundationally grounded. This really looks at, making sure you're in the right mindset, that you've done everything possible. You've tried to create awareness. You've had your procedures, your processes followed. You've educated on the person. You've stepped them through. You've communicated effectively. You've done everything possible as a leader and a manager of your group to create that awareness. And that's holding yourself accountable and foundationally grounded, because you're going to walk into a very complex situation, or you might be, something that's, been bugging you for a while, but you're going to know you've done everything possible to deal with that, and you've taken the right steps to handle it. You have to remember, in some situations, you can't fix everything. It might be out of your control. But again, you want to be in the position where you've done everything possible you can. So obviously, learning how you deal with situations and different styles, dealing with different people, is such a big point. We talk about having certain goals or KPIs or strategic plans. It's great to have that, but you want to make sure that your systems and processes support you as a manager or owner in your practice, because that's effectively what will create the accountability across the board. And I've put it there, and that's not a plug, but you need to lean on experts in your roles. I look at the role of owners and managers in private practice being such a dynamic one, because in what other business do you have one person who's generally accountable for everything, be it HR, IT, Medicare, legal, everything else in between? It's such a unique position. So I think when you're in these positions, you need to create that accountability, but you need to surround yourself with a network of people who can help you along the way. And that might be other peers, other managers in other areas. You know, the PHN does such a great job supporting practices. You know, there's such a strong support there from the practice liaison officers and everyone. So it's just about understanding who can help you and who's got the right advice to assist it along the way. So ways to support yourself become more accountable. And I think this is a really nice way over the next sort of 10 minutes just to finish up on you as a manager and your style. I love to, you know, go through some of these points to say, okay, well, if you're going to go to work tomorrow, you want to make a little bit more of a difference, or you just want to test yourself. You want to look at how can you engage differently? How can you pick up clues? You know, the first thing we love to say is look at becoming more self-aware. And this is quite an interesting one, because paying attention to your feelings can be really interesting. And I did this backed off a model that, you know, we followed when we did some professional development internally. Paying attention to your feelings at work and at home is so interesting, because I feel you have different emotions at different times. You know, at work, you might have a very different type of energy, or you start the day, you go to work, you know, have coffee, you engage, you ask people how their days were. There might not be that emotional connection like you have with your family. And you know, that's the big point, that you've got an escape. You can go somewhere, you can interact with X amount of personalities, you can speak to people. You know, you can get that buzz. Whilst people might do things that might, you know, annoy you at work, at least, you know, you can leave that day and you know, start a day afresh. Whereas when you're at home, you know, you might have you know, you might come home from a big day and you might just want to zone out. You might want to just relax a little bit. And, you know, you might have kids that are, you know, we've got 3 under 6 here. So, you know, the house doesn't stop until, you know, 8 o'clock at night. So it's a point there where, you know, you might come home feeling a bit more drained, or you just don't want to engage or talk. And, you know, you might be in a position where, you know, well, oh, wow, that really annoys me having to do that, or to, you know, go above and beyond to help someone when I've just had a day like that. So it's a point of making sure you can understand how you're feeling, what your emotions are, and what might trigger you, or what might make you happy, what might make you sad. So paying attention to your feelings and your emotions is such an important point, because not reacting in the heat of a moment in certain situations, or knowing what those triggers are, is a great way to then get control of certain emotions. So remember, emotions are only temporary. And if you learn to control your emotions, or be self-aware of how you're acting in a particular period of time, is the first step of getting some form of improvement. Because once you understand your emotions, you can practice to self-regulate, finding techniques that help you release workplace stress. Put it in the chat, and you know, what do we do? What do we do like to get away from certain stresses or packs there? Or if you can, if you can't, that's fine. But you know, it might be doing exercise. It might be, you know, mine's fishing. I love fishing. I love boating. I love spending time on the water. That's my escape. That's what I do. And that's what we do with the family. That's how we unwind. But again, and it's a shame because I haven't seen the chat, but we normally see alcohol. Don't refer to drugs and alcohol. It's not good for you. Go. So, but again, you want to make sure that you find techniques that help you regulate your stress, that allow you to keep your cool, and obviously make sure you're in the right point or position when you start your difficult days. And again, think before you make decisions. It always sounds very obvious, and in a heat of a moment, the worst thing you can do is react. Or if it's sending that email, that message, or saying that comment that you're just biting your tongue not to say. So make sure you do keep your cool. Don't act in the heat of the moment, and just sit on it, even sit on it overnight, and then, you know, you can get advice, speak to your spouses, debrief, and then move forward. But at least controlling your emotions and understanding how to handle particular scenarios and taking constructive criticism and feedback is a great way to, again, get control of it. Improving your social skills. I think as a leader, a manager, owner, this is one of the most important points you need to have. And why that is, you know, we start our day in our office. I'm the barista in the office too. So not barrister, barista. That means we go by the coffee machine. We all have a coffee together. I'll make coffee for the team. We all talk about, what we had for dinner, what the kids did, how they drew on the wall, what we've got coming up that day, the difficult cases we're dealing with, the funny things that happen in our life. And it's such a natural way to engage. But what it also allows you to do as a team is to pick up when things aren't going right. Because if you notice that you've got a team of 8 people, which is what we do, and if I notice someone who regularly comes, they just goes and sits down at their desk and doesn't engage that morning, or, doesn't come in and say hello, or is just not themselves, I instantly can pick up that, well, wait a minute, something's not right here. I have to, make effort to understand what's going on. They might just have a busy day and are stressed, or they may have something at home that's going on. And there's a fine line between being supportive as a manager and leader, between crossing a boundary and asking, personal sensitive questions that are not. So, you always want to have the ability to have the open discussion to say, is everything okay? If someone says, yes, everything's fine, or they open up about something, excellent, but you don't want to push that limit or boundaries too far as well. So actively listen, be engaged, have those social skills, say hello, pick up on the body language, the nonverbal communication and points in your practice. And it's great to have it. That's how you get your persuasion skills. That's how you get people on board. That's how you drive your values, your culture and practice. So avoid office drama. I think it's so important to understand office drama is something that you don't want to be part of as managers or owners. But again, it's really important that you pick up on it and you deal with it correctly as well. So that's making sure you don't allow it to happen. You isolate it, you deal with it, and you address it when it occurs, because it's not good for culture if there's gossiping, in other inappropriate behavior and conduct happening. Deal with it effectively and make sure that it's squashed at that point. Because again, a lot of your good staff that you've used your social skills to build relationships up will come to you and say, oh, this person's been saying this, or this has happened there. And it's not a point of someone who's being disloyal to someone else. It's a fact of situations making them feel uncomfortable, and they're notifying you as a manager as to what's happening. Become more empathetic. I hope you love my photo there. It's, as a leader and as a manager, again, you want to make sure that, you are empathetic. You are, following processes and steps that are fair and reasonable. I think it's so important that you do follow that step. And if you were going through a process, what would you expect? What would you expect on the other side? Would you want to be discussed with it first? If you're going to start and follow a disciplinary process. We had this happen today. I had one of my very loyal members up in Cairns call. And again, this is the point of them coming back to having a issue where a staff member's account got scammed. They ended up going through a process where they engaged an external HR provider. They went through it. They said to the staff member, you need to be here tomorrow at this time. You can have a support person, go through a formal process. And they ended up going through and completely damaging the relationship of this person because of it. So in the end, the managers now felt like the relationship's been questioned, their judgment's been questioned. And the advice that was provided of going through this process may have been legally correct, but they hadn't put themselves in the other position's shoes to actually deal with the situation. So again, this is another issue of when you're going through a process, make sure you go through a process that's fair and reasonable, and don't obviously go through a process that's too harsh either. So again, make sure fair and reasonable steps are followed, and there's really easy ways to do that through early intervention and communication, so you can get to a certain point to do it. And that's where the empathy comes out. But at certain points, being very direct is very appropriate as well. So I'm going to skip through working your motivation. I know that seems such a corny photo, and I've loved it because, hang on to it, make sure you do it. But do what you love. And I think that's such a a passionate thing. We all should be doing what we love. I know I love what I do because it makes a difference in the practices we work with. We do make positive change. You get that sense of reward when you support the people you do. And I think it's so important that as leaders, we also set that tone with our group of people that we mentor and coach on a daily basis. It's up to us to stay motivated, to keep that passion going, and to remind everyone why we're here, what we're doing, and the whole bigger picture of it and where we're heading. So I think you need to work on that to maintain a positive attitude. Otherwise, it's very easy just to get stuck in the negatives with everything. But looking past it and saying positive is a big thing you have to do in the roles we have. I'm going to finish up on cultures of blame, and I know I'll take 2 more minutes. So making sure you understand the signs is so important, because you can create the right systems, build accountability, but from a culture of blame perspective, you want to make sure that you're not oversharing things with your staff. There's the right systems and processes. So we see a lot of managers that just don't maintain the right confidential information. They might overshare of someone's personal situations, or might make jokes of certain things. In the capacity, you always want to maintain confidentiality and professionalism at all times in the roles. Blaming individuals for issues rather than finding solutions. We've spent so much time working with managers, supporting their staff to be solution focused rather than blaming problems, or that person didn't do it, this wasn't the issue. It's then trying to think about, well, actually, wait a minute, just let's look at ways that we can resolve this, and as a team we can work through it, rather than focusing on someone directly. Covering up errors. If things are being swept under the rug and you're not finding out about it until it's a big snowball heading your way, you probably then want to sit back to understand, well, what's going on? Is our staff just fearful of addressing things and issues? And is there other points there that we're missing that they're not? So seeking feedback along the way is always important as to why wasn't this addressed. Not my job, not my problem. A good one, again, because we often see that as a typical issue with regards to staff recently have been turning around saying, well, I haven't been paid enough, or I'm not part of my salary, it's not part of my PD, and not chipping in and supporting when they have to. Again, having that cultural issue of, well, that's not the right attitude, or that doesn't align with our values or what we expect, is a big thing. So trying to bring people back in line as to why it's important to do particular tasks is a big thing. And the other one that's the most common is negativity about how busy we are. So, it's so easy to see this pattern. Well, oh my God, it's just so busy and I haven't got time for that, or I can't do that. But just continually complaining to everyone about it. So again, they're the telltale signs of, but you actually know that that person has capacity and the ability to deal with more, but the way they deflect from potential underperformance or laziness is, well, it's just so busy. So again, trying to change that mindset, trying to, put it in place where it's framed correctly is important. There's a question popped up, and I'll get to that at the end, because I'm cautious of the time. Eliminating. So with eliminating cultures of blame, work on your foundations we've gone through this morning. Create that accountability. Make sure you've got the mindset. Make sure you're aware of your style and your management processes as well. Because if you're feeding into some of that culture of blame, or you might be oversharing, or you might not have the mindset because you're just exhausted, or you're on the verge of burnout. I saw the PHN has a session coming up on burnout. Know the signs, because you might not realize how something might come across, or what staff are perceiving things in a particular way. So again, make sure you can openly discuss what your purpose is, what you're there to do, hone in on your foundations and systems you've created. And I think more importantly, hold people accountable not to shape your culture. So if things aren't going right, don't be afraid to address things, because trying to shift a culture of blame, or where people have gotten away with something for such a long time, holding them accountable to then actually do their job properly is the first point of bringing it back around. So use activities, we often do above and below the line activities as to what's acceptable behavior and what isn't. It'll be so interesting to see it. We do it with great cultures and we do it with poor cultures, and the response you get from, if you do it and you have all the responses with above the line responses come through and everyone's putting up everything and they get it. And when it comes to the below the line and there's not a lot, that's generally a good sign that you've got an awesome culture. Whereas the other way, if you've got a poor culture in your practice and you do this activity and you ask what, are some below the line behaviors we don't want to see here, and you've got below the lines full and above the line there's not much, it's generally a good indication to say that something's not right in the practice. So again, stay on top of it. My famous quote is, you will spend just as much time managing a good culture as you will spend managing a bad one. So spend the time managing it because it's a lot more rewarding than managing a terrible one. So the systems foundations, I'm going to skip this and focus on this. These are my key takeaways for everyone. So have strong foundations. We know what they are now. You know how to do it. Get the right support. Take notes and document. Make sure you're always relaying feedback back to your staff. If it's a simple documentation saying, look, it was great speaking with you today. This is what we went through. This is the expectation. Let me know if you have any questions. Get in the practice of doing that, because that's the first step of holding someone accountable for something they're not doing. Provide a process you would expect to receive. I've repeated that 3 or 4 times. It's just about that mindset of thinking about, well, what is fair and reasonable? What would I want to be, or how would I want to be treated? Get advice. The complexity of the laws we work with now aren't straightforward. So this is where we support hundreds of practices with day-to-day issues, dealing with problems. It is complex and you do need support along the way. Don't act in the heat of the moment. And don't delay. So you might not want to act, but you don't want to wait too long. So don't delay, act. And dealing with things now and then. Imagine if you had issues and I waited a month and I came to you with several issues, rather than dealing with those issues one by one as they occurred. Make sure your timing's right and you proactively address issues. Have tough conversations. I had to say it for whoever runs online. If you struggle having tough conversations, you need to upskill yourself to do so, and you don't have to make them tough. But again, you can go through a process to make them appropriate at the time, but it's part of the job and it's a very difficult thing to do. But when you learn to do it right, it can be the easiest thing you have to do, because you've done everything right and the fair way. Follow through. Don't start a process if you're not going to follow it through, or you don't have the authority to follow it through with, because it's just going to make your life worse and the other person's as well. And there's not going to have any positive outcome. So follow through when you start a process, reflect and improve your own performance. And it's a big thing, but what you go through throughout this whole journey makes you a different person as well. So again, they're my key takeaways around accountability and what you need to do and look at. We've got a few Q&As, which I'm happy for everyone to come back online. But obviously, if you want to know more, you need support, or I've triggered something there, feel free to scan in. But obviously, on my behalf, I want to say thank you for everyone for coming in, especially in an evening session. I know it's a great time for you to unwind and switch. And I want to say a huge thank you to Sarah and the team at CES PHN as well for having me this evening to present to you all. So thank you again. And Sarah, I might pass over to you.
Yep. Thank you so much, George. Really appreciate it. We just have 2 questions that has come through just last minute. We actually have a few now. So one of them is, what happens when a reception staff doesn't improve their work capability with variable relay training? Most of them come to the job without any training, just to pass on the time. Is there any way that they can improve the intention of the receptionists for that role?
Yeah, so a very good one. And again, coming back to role clarity and what we put back into the roles as well, or what we put back into orientation, onboarding, is crucial. And I think, again, when you maintain a strong sense of understanding, when you've got a good culture, but if people are coming to you without the right roles and you support them in the right way, you would hope there'd be some form of improvement. If you have someone who's got no intention of improving their reception jobs. They're just disengaged. They're just passing time. They're not engaged. And if you can pick that up on the early onset, my advice would be just to pass them on and terminate them in probation. I know that sounds really harsh, but if they're not passionate or there for the right reasons, why have them there? Because they're going to damage your culture. They're going to set that expectation that, well, they can get away with it and not be passionate or care. And it does rub off. But again, having people, training them, onboarding them the right way and getting that positive improvement is what you want to see. And if they have that willingness, I think it's great. But again, you need to have a good pool of casuals. So if you do have someone who works at a particular pace, they are somewhat they're reliable. You need people like that too. So again, I'm not saying to terminate all the staff you're not happy with, but you might need to have those people that can fill in those positions. And they may not have any ambitions to stay in a practice for a long period of time. So I think you need to take the good with the bad and work with what you got at the moment.
Looks like we've just got one final question, George, if that's all right. It's often PMs are better trained than the owners for HR issues, but the owners are looked at as being the leaders. How can the PM do their job when the owners don't support or are not aligned? Owners often dump their issues to the PMs and to deal with rather than sort of sorting it out themselves.
And I think whoever's asked that one, I think it's a good one. And I think it's such a good and loaded question. I personally feel that as PMs, you have to make it your job to also upskill your owner as to your role, what you're dealing with, the issues. But unfortunately, it comes with part of the position as well. But the alignment side that you've just put in there is crucial. And that's the whole point why I had that image of the pawn with the queen's hat on, is because without the right support or alignment from or with your manager or with your owner, it just creates confusion. It creates lack of direction. They might be seen as leaders. However, if there's a mixed confusion as to where decisions are coming from, you should be able to stand in any discussion you have that's a difficult discussion with staff saying, well, no, yes, the doctor, we've spoken and this is a decision we've made together as a practice or as a management team, and support that discussion, and should probably be sitting next to you as well in most difficult situations. But again, there is a big portion that is part of the job where you have to deal with some of these issues, but you always want to make sure you have that right support and alignment, be it together or not, in the same room. So I think work on creating awareness as to, the role. If there's gaps in your alignment, what is it? Why aren't you aligned would be my first question. Is it because they just don't like dealing with conflict? And I hate to say it, 99% of the doctors we deal with do not like dealing with conflict. And they just want to go there, practice, do their job, but creating awareness of how they can spend more time and energy on the business than working in it is really what you want to focus to as well. And hopefully that can create more alignment with all the roles and tasks you do as a PM.
Thank you so much, George. I might just quickly sneak one little question in. When you were speaking about the pays and the awards, we have a question in regards to what happens if you hire a receptionist and they're within the age frame of, like, say, around 19. Does that mean that receptionist would be entitled to the $32 per hour as a casual worker?
So great question. There are junior rates under the HPSS award. So if an adult rate starts from 21 years of age and up, and that obviously then means that you apply the 32.35, which was a level 3. But for someone who's 19 years of age, it would be 80% of the adult rate. So you would multiply the 32.35 by 80%, which would then give you what their 19-year-old rate of pay would be. So you could pay it, but you have to make sure that you keep an eye on their birthdays so that the increments increase every year. And or if there's minimum wage increases or level increases, it might change, 2 or 3 times in 1 year. So there are junior rates, and you wouldn't have to apply the adult rate to someone who's under the age of 21.
Perfect. So thank you so much, George. That's all of our questions, and we are conscious of time, and I know that we did go over time a little bit, but we really thank you for your time, George. And I also like to thank everyone else for attending tonight. just a quick reminder, the link for the evaluation survey will pop up on your screens shortly. And if you have any further questions, please email us at praxissupport@cespen.com.au. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, George. And I hope everyone has a good evening. Thank you.
Everyone, thank you.
Thank you.